At 9 a.m. in Hollywood, California, 100 years ago today, a script for a disaster picture by Frances Marion landed on the desk of every studio head in town. A wicked, sticky tragedy told the story of the great Boston molasses flood that had happened just a few months prior. Jack Warner didn't even get past page 5 before he grabbed a suitcase filled with crisp dollar bills that had been intended for his mistress and raced for his car. Across town, Adolph Zukor saw that title page and called for Cecil B. DeMille. By 10:30 a.m., Carl Laemmle and William Fox had also caught wind of the frantic rush and were on their way to the newly opened Musso and Frank's on Hollywood Boulevard, where Frances was holding court. Still in costume, Douglas Fairbanks left the soundstage, where he was filming The Mask of Zorro, to try and snag the screenplay for his new venture, United Artists. As he left, D.W. Griffith shouted,
"Just make sure there aren't any Negroes in that sugar picture."
Ew. Yikes. The assembled moguls burst in simultaneously to find Frances Marion sitting in a corner booth with her new husband, film cowboy Fred Thompson.
"Looky, Franny, I suppose all these here fellers come to buy your molasses yarn off you."
No one present that day could ever agree on what happened next, except for the fact that Fred sounded like a complete dipshit. But we do know how it all ended. After a few words were exchanged between Laemmle and the Warners, a shouting match broke out among everyone, and then there was a gunshot. And another. After the smoke cleared a few minutes later, the Hollywood Boulevard sewers would turn red with the blood of 5 development executives and 12 civilians. The aftermath of that incident would change Hollywood forever. I'm Abby Larson, and welcome to Unremembered Hollywood, a podcast dedicated to telling completely real and true stories of Hollywood's yesteryear. Step back in time with me to when a battle over a screenplay led to a series of events that would change the motion picture industry forever. And now, the tale of the rise and fall of the President of Hollywood. Frances was scandalized by the outbreak of violence, so she and Fred hightailed it to their favorite getaway in Etna Springs, California. She sent a telegram to all of them.
"Dear gentlemen, I heard about the Donnybrook in Hollywood the other night, and to think it's all over a screenplay. You should be ashamed. Stop. Until you morons can come to your senses, I'm going to keep this molasses picture to myself. Stop. Fred and I are going to be tits deep in a mud bath until you pull your heads out of your asses, and we do not wish to be disturbed. Stop. Sincerely, Frances Marion, the world's greatest fucking screenwriter."
The moguls retreated behind their studio gates to plan their next moves. Most were expecting an escalation of the violence, some an all-out war. What none of them expected, though, was a midnight call from Jack Warner. Zukor's assistant, Alice Remington, recounted the conversation in her unfortunately titled memoir, Adolph, a man with a lot of good ideas.
"While nothing would give me and my brothers greater pleasure than to lubricate our projectors with your blood, I believe there could be a better path before us. If you agree, let us convene tomorrow in my office. If not, see you in hell."
Carl Laemmle, who took a bullet to the shoulder during the fracas, knew full well he could be walking into a trap. After sucking the slug out himself, he told his wife,
"My dear, it's possible that I'm going to walk out of this meeting having played a part in revolutionizing the pictures. It's equally possible, however, that Warner is going to shoot me in the face and take all our stuff. If he knocks on the door, there is a derringer in the entryway table with a single bullet. Use it on him, or save it for yourself."
Jesus. But Laemmle, along with Zukor, Fox, and Fairbanks, took the risk. They sat opposite Warner in his shiny new office on Sunset. We're drawing our recreation of the meeting from Mr. Fairbanks' secretary's copious notes.
"I think we can all agree that last night's incident was unfortunate, but I have come up with a solution."
Irving Stansel was born in Queens, New York on July 19, 1884. His father was a lawyer specializing in horse law, and his mother, after a brief acting career of her own, raised Irving and his 8 siblings in their large Victorian home. After college, he spent several years bouncing around the country, finally landing in the winter film capital of the world, Jacksonville, Florida. He wrote to his mother of his experience shortly after he arrived.
Dearest Mother, I have done as you and Father feared and taken up with the show folk. It is not as bad as all that, however. I have taken a position at Vim Pictures as a mailroom lad. Oh, all the stars I've seen. Bimsy Brubaker, Harpo Marbleman, Daffy Pepperidge, and Tilly Kornheiser is even more beautiful in person than on the screen. I even caught a glimpse of old Soupman Jasper, Father's favorite hobo comedian. Don't tell anyone, but they're always shorter than they appear on the screen. I will write again soon, undoubtedly with news of fame and fortune. Yours, I.S.
After a few years learning the ropes in Jacksonville, Irving decided to make the move out to California. He arrived in the spring of 1909, finding work as a production assistant on films like A Bunch of Carriages Move Slowly Past a Camera and the screwball comedy Cousin Shaky Gets the Shakes. Epilepsy had not yet been identified. But the hungry young man again worked his way up, and in less than 2 years, he was the executive in charge of big prestige films like Papa's All Sad in His Canoe Again and My Darling Has the Dropsy. These films caught the attention of Mack Sennett, who gave Irving free rein to make whatever he wanted. His first picture was a science fiction two-reeler called The 50-Year-Old Man. The New York Times reported,
Audiences ran screaming from a Fifth Avenue Nickelodeon after a scientifical fiction motion picture portrayed a man living into his 50th year. The movie is under consideration for removal by the theater owner, who lamented his antipathy at cleaning up patrons' repatriated lunches.
Vomiting moviegoers aside, it was a massive hit, and Stansel's rise to the top was only getting started. After his 4th consecutive #1 hit, Stansel awaited his first sizable royalty check. But when he contacted the studio accounting department, they told him something curious. When he asked about the 50-year-old man, the accountant told him that this runaway hit, which by all accounts had grossed over $8,000, or $200 million in 2019, was still in the red. It was Stansel's first taste to shady studio accounting. Despite that, every studio in town was banging down his door, begging for his golden touch. But in Hollywood, the good times don't go on forever. Now, from the archives, here is a real advertisement from 1919.
Now that the war to end all wars is over, don't you think it's time to start reaping the rewards? Our boys went across the ocean and vanquished the Kaiser and his hordes. Now it's your opportunity to get in on the ground floor. Introducing Weimar Republic Stability Bonds. Invest just $100 today. It'll be worth 100 times that by 1940 if everything in Germany is still going great. It's practically a sure thing. Just listen to these satisfied policyholders.
I just come back from Germany, and let me tell you, 9 out of 10 crowds wanted us and the rest of Europe to whoop them in the Great War. You can practically feel all the German institutions fortifying themselves for what's ding-dong sure to be a long and stable reign. Everybody here's talking about how there's literally no chance of hyperinflation. I've been singing every time I get into Weimar Republic Stability Bonds. They're the bee's knees.
If there's one thing I know, it's the American spirit and its willingness to accept all kinds of pansexual and gender-bending performance art. Well, let me tell you, good sir, that Berlin is just boiling over with the stuff. Women dressed as men, cats wearing dogs. You wouldn't believe the rouge on that fella's chapless butt cheeks that are chapped. Gee willikers. So strap on your garters, ladies and gentlemen, and invest now in Weimar Republic Stability Bonds. Holy doozy wowskis.
Well, they've had a tough run of it so far, but Europe's Jews are finally ready to sit back, relax, and...
Oh, okay. I think you get the idea. The collected moguls laughed long and hard as soon as Warner said the name. Zukor was the first one to compose himself enough to speak.
I'll be battered and fucked, Warner. I wouldn't hire that man to produce a stool sample.
Warner was unfazed.
That's exactly why he's perfect. Sure, his last couple of pictures didn't hit the mark, but...
William Fox and Carl Laemmle were less than enthusiastic. Fox.
The man is a complete and total dullard, Jack. There's no way he can grasp the intricacies of the picture business.
Carl Laemmle.
What's next, Jack? A woman as head of a studio?
As the meeting descended into chaos, one of Hollywood's newest power players wanted her seat at the table, too.
Well, 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 if it isn't the biggest menagerie of dick slaps this side of Cahuenga.
Mary Pickford was a rarity in Hollywood. She was one of the biggest film stars of the time, a full partner at United Artists along with her husband, Douglas Fairbanks, as well as best friends with writer Frances Marion. And she meant business.
Oh, go ahead, Carl. What were you saying? I wonder if my pal Frances fucking Marion might be interested in your notions about our sex. And you, Dougie? Did I miss a note on the icebox to meet you down here?
Douglas Fairbanks, perhaps the biggest movie star in the world at the time, was left speechless.
Mary, sweetie, I...
Oh, don't marry sweetie I me. I'm your business partner, and I'll mop the floor with all of these chuckleheads and use your hair to do it.
Welcome, Mrs. Pickford. We were just strategizing how to avoid further bloodshed over our little business disagreements.
He wants to name Irving Stansel as president of the board of all of Hollywood, after a fashion.
Oh, that is literally the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard.
Please, Mary, if you'll just let me say my piece.
Mary nodded, and Jack Warner launched into a monologue touting the idea with the fervor of a tent revival preacher. He promised the group that together, this new little industry would not only print money, but shape the country's very culture. He promised Stansel would have autonomy to settle disputes, make sure that no one studio or executive got an unfair leg up, and most importantly, that he would be a fall guy if anything went sideways. By the end of the speech, he'd brought every one of them around to his side. But what Warner left out of his speech was that he was setting Irving up to be a puppet, a proxy that would lead to Warner's eventual complete takeover of Hollywood. It just so happened that Warner had just wrapped a biopic called There's a Terribly Large Amount of Soup in Your Mustache, Mr. President, the William Howard Taft story, and had an Oval Office set ready to go. When Stansel arrived, the assembled studio heads cheered him enthusiastically.
Friends, I thank you for bringing me here today, and I appreciate the great trust that you placed in me. I swear to you all right here and now that together we will usher in a new era for Hollywood. One of peace and prosperity.
Say, Irv, that was a corking speech, but what was that maniacal laugh at the end there?
A maniacal laugh?
Yeah, sounded like you laughed very malevolently, old man.
Did I? Must have been the wind banging against these old window sashes.
They look brand new.
Maybe it was a dog.
Oh, of course. That was probably the studio lot dog. Old Poochers.
Yeah, I just saw old Poochers outside a moment ago. Definitely him.
So, you're saying a dog named Old Poochers laughed maniacally just outside the window the moment that you finished your speech and in an exact mimicry of your own facial expressions?
A lot of people were saying it's Old Poochers. Fantastic dog.
A documentary crew interviewed Mary in 1970, and she lamented the fact that the group didn't heed the warning signs sooner.
Looking back now, I do wish I'd listened to my gut. I knew it wasn't Old Poochers. That laugh was way too high-pitched. And also, why would anyone in the picture business lie like that just to advance their own interests?
Warner smiled, knowing that the conspiracy remained undiscovered. And Stansel smiled too, knowing that Warner was none the wiser about his real plan.
On to it, then. Mr. President, the first matter before you is what is to be done with Mrs. Marion's new script.
One of you fuckwits say my name?
Franny, darling, back already?
Kisses, Mary dear. Fred and I heard about this little wank session from Sammy Goldfish and thought we'd like to hear about the future of my molasses picture.
Yes, sir. We're more anxious than a possum at a bobcat convention to hear.
Fred, please.
Yes, the molasses picture. Well, I read it and I studied your arguments on the way here. Francis, you're a wonderful screenwriter. You're probably the best, and no one respects female screenwriters more than me. Since Mr. Fairbanks and Mrs. Pickford have the newest film concern, and since they're all dear friends, it's my judgment that A Wicked Sticky Tragedy shall be awarded to United Artists.
Oh, bully for you, United Artists! This picture is going to be dynamite. All the rest of you, suck my dick. Fred, move that sweet ass of yours to the car.
Frances flipped everyone off with both hands as she backed out of the room. As Pickford and Fairbanks celebrated, Warner barehandedly crushed the whiskey tumbler he was holding.
I have to admit that I'm jealous, you two. If you'll excuse me, there's some urgent studio business I must attend to.
Years later, Carl Laemmle would describe the shocking aftermath of that historic meeting in his unpublished memoir, Like Laemmle's to the Sea. I wonder if that made sense back then. Laemmle dawdled in the lobby for a bit. He watched as Stansel approached his brand-new cherry-red Meisenhelder Roadster, until all of a sudden, a hulking mass of goon twisted Stansel's arm behind his back and slammed him against the hood.
Irving was pinned up against the car by a massive fellow. He must have been almost 5 feet 9 inches tall. Then I heard Stansel, with not a tinge of deference in his voice, say 6 words that neither Shakespeare nor Homer nor Twain had managed to string together.
Don't you know who I am?
I said to myself at that moment, I am totally going to use that one. As I was bathing in the rapturous poetry that had just fallen from Irving's lips, that little weasel Warner strode up.
I know who you are. You're a backstabbing, no-account dingus.
What in the dickens, Jack? We're partners.
We were until you took that molasses picture and gave it to United Fartists. Yeah, I said it.
Jack, that was a tremendous meeting. One of the best I've ever been in. But if I came out of the gate looking like I was in your pocket, the jig would be up.
According to Laemmle, Jack had his goon release Irving, and the 2 men spoke for some time. About what, Laemmle couldn't or wouldn't say.
Now in possession of this knowledge, I could have run back to the other titans of film and exposed their little cabal. But if I'd chosen that path, we'd be transported right back into the Stone Age of film, shooting at each other over a picture about a man who looks at a horse for 20 minutes. No. I would hold on to that knowledge, biding my time until a moment of opportunity arose.
The reign of Irving Stansel got off to an inauspicious start. A Wicked Sticky Tragedy was renamed Molasses Tidal Wave at the behest of the most famous United Artists partner, Charlie Chaplin. Frances Marion was not pleased. She wrote to her friend Mary.
Dearest Mary, I've had it up to here with this shit-awful nonsense. I mean, molasses tidal wave. Tell Chaplin to stick to twitching that mustache of his at underage girls. Ah, hell, I have to go. Fred has his hand caught in a pickle jar again.
The picture didn't do much business at the box office, hauling in an underwhelming $4,000 against a nearly $5,000 budget. Not even a rollicking theme song from Al Jolson could bring the audiences into the theaters.
I had a little honey just as sweet as can be, but then she got a lot more sweet. You see, my baby was picky and never would cheat. That is till something sticky swept her off of her feet. It was a bittersweet kind of day when molasses took my baby away.
After the initial bump in the road, Stansel presided over a fairly calm 1919. Fox and Laemmle squabbled over a set of orphans they both wanted to buy, and Stansel denied D.W. Griffith's attempt to name a new picture, I'm Just Not a Fan of Black People, You Guys. It ended up in theaters under the name Little Midge's Railroad Adventure. But otherwise, it was business as usual for Hollywood. Just as Warner and all the other studio heads had settled in with the new system, Stansel made his move. More after this ad, which first aired the week Molasses Tidal Wave premiered.
Say there, you. Yeah, you. What do you say, Mac? You comfortable in those burlap underpants? I didn't think so. I want to tell you about a new company that is doing things a bit differently. It's called Jack Pelton, and he's rethinking the way unmentionables are made. Rather than just cutting 2 holes in an old bag and using a piece of rope from a ship as a belt, Jack and his team of migrant workers take whole bolts of fabric made from the softest wheats and barleys and spin them into a thread that's basically a little bit softer than your normal burlap. For all your unmentionables, look no further than Jack Pelton. And be sure to write down the code word Spanish Flu somewhere on the form to get 10 cents off your first purchase.
All of the studios had a historically ambitious release schedule for the spring of 1920. Senate had a new comedy called The Hobo's New Hat that was testing through the roof. Fox had a tearjerker called The Avuncular Tubercular. And Laemmle was putting everything he had into a thinly veiled biopic about himself called Now I Laemmle Down to Sleep. And Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle took a dramatic turn in the prestige picture Stinky Goes Bananas for Justice. As a side note, Arbuckle was snubbed for Best Actor that year. His co-star, however, a bonobo named Mr. Buttons, got a nod. Arbuckle resented the ape so much that he pulled a gun on Mr. Buttons at Lillian Gish's birthday party, but that's a different story. The Roaring Twenties had begun. From his office high atop the Hollywood Hills, Irving Stansel sensed that his moment had arrived and outlined his plans to Daily Variety.
For too long, this group of elite moguls have tried to tell us what's good and what's lowbrow. Well, today, the common man has a friend at the top of Hollywood, and we're going to start making pictures for them.
So Irving Stansel set about transforming the entire industry. Using the near unlimited power that the studio chiefs had given him, he started making big changes. Prestige pictures got small, short-run releases, while broad comedies and melodramas went wide, and Stansel made sure the advertising budgets were extravagant. As he grew more and more comfortable in his position, his decisions became more and more controversial. He commissioned statues of himself to be placed in every major studio. He had elaborate newsreels produced about his triumphs, both real and imagined. And in one particularly bizarre move, he named his son, Little Irving, to be the chief morals officer for all the studios. By all accounts, Little Irving was a complete dullard who lacked almost any discernible skills. The word around town was that without his father, he would be unemployable. But none of that seemed to matter. Light-hearted films like Get That Gypsy did big box office business, while highbrow fare like I've Fallen in Love with a Gypsy Against Father's Wishes failed to gain traction. While Warner, Laemmle, Zukor, and the UA chief seethed, Fox put his feet up on his desk and lit a cigar. He told his secretary,
I don't know about you, Dorothy, but I think Stansel is doing great. He's doing exactly what he promised.
As whispers about Stansel's erratic behavior grew, Fox continued to congratulate and egg on Stansel. He released statement after statement, heaping praise on his every move. As the box office numbers grew and grew, Stansel crowed louder and louder about his leadership. What was supposed to be a largely ceremonial position was becoming a real problem. More after this, a radio advertisement from 1920.
Damn these infernal workers!
Why all the bother, Mortimer?
I have had it up to here with all these parasites bleeding me dry. Just the other day, a man who has worked for me for 40 years asked me for a raise in his pay.
Why, that's preposterous.
I know. And to top it all off, some of the workers are discussing cooperating to form some manner of a union as to pressure me to treat them better. If if that's even possible.
You should try No Other Choice Recruitment and Conscription Agency.
Why, what is that?
Only the #1 worker recruitment firm in these great 48 states. They match the best, most docile workers with the worst sons of bitches hiring.
That sounds right up my alley. But I'm thinking about going all child labor on account of their tiny hands.
Well, that's why you should give No Other Choice a shot. They pluck the finest candidates off the streets and take them directly to your factories.
Wow. And they're all orphans?
Sure.
Sounds like I have no other choice.
No Other Choice Recruitment and Conscription Agency. Your orphans are ready.
By the spring of 1921, 2 years into Stansel's term, Warner called another meeting. His secretary, Ethel, recounted the meeting for a film historian some years later.
Every one of the bosses were in a tizzy. Mr. Stansel had really ruffled a lot of feathers and was generally a total dick.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that Stansel has become a huge distraction.
He's all anyone talks about anymore.
I caught our new chief morals officer stealing office supplies from our cabinet, and when I confronted him about it, 24 paper clips fell out of his mouth.
This is all your fault, Warner. You thought you could control him.
I'm sorry, what's that?
That's right. Jack and Irving have a secret alliance. I heard them discussing it after his inauguration.
We're well past all that, Carl. It's time we act.
Come on, fellows. He's doing a lot of great things.
His term isn't up for another 2 years, and you gave him all the power in the world.
Leave it to me.
We left it to you before, and now we're in the shitter.
Mary's right. We do this together.
I can't be part of this. I'm with Stansel. All the way.
Quiet, brown-noser.
I am no brown-noser. I just have the courage to stand up to...
Oh, cram it, Fox. We're all tired of hearing your bullshit.
But the others knew they couldn't trust him, so they all circled up around Mr. Warner and whispered, so Mr. Fox couldn't hear. He just slumped down in his seat and he pouted.
Okay. So here's the plan.
Stansel was oblivious to the brewing trouble. When he heard rumblings of malcontent, he either deemed the messenger a liar or a fool, but all the self-delusion in the world couldn't insulate Irving from what was in store. Stansel denigrates men, women, blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, pretty much everyone else, proclaimed Daily Variety on September 13, 1920. Someone, it seemed, had sent in a letter that Stansel had written his mother shortly after arriving in Hollywood.
Dearest Mother, I have finally found my way out west. I find the folk here in California to be objectionable to the extreme. The men, for example, are all effete, lazy, and dull. The women strut around like they are equal, and all the ethnics. Here is a list of grievances I have with all groups, starting with the Latin male.
Right, more of that. Okay. The article sent shockwaves across Hollywood. For a couple of days, anyway. After some condemnation and platitudes from city leaders, a funny thing happened. Nothing. There was no public outcry, no marches demanding Stansel's job. No one cared. Warner was on the set of Take a Hike, Kaiser, a buddy comedy about Kaiser Wilhelm and the naturalist John Muir lost in the woods together. A brief aside, it is not a good movie. Warner was watching a take when several armed men in uniforms he didn't recognize burst into the stage.
Excuse me, this is a closed set.
You got that right, pal. Clear out everyone. This picture is shut down on the authority of President Stansel.
And who the hell are you supposed to be?
Movie police. You're Warner, right?
When Warner nodded, the man doubled him over with a punch to the gut.
Ooh. President Stansel would prefer it if you and your friends would stop speaking to the press.
Warner watched as the group of thugs left, knocking over the camera and other equipment on their way out. The other studio heads received similar visits. All of them, except William Fox. His film, Orphans in the Outfield, a baseball picture about 3 kids in an oversized uniform pretending to be a pro baseball player, continued filming without interruption. That fact was not lost on the other studios. But the moguls remained basically powerless. That is, until Irving Stansel called a press conference.
Thank you all for being here. I want to speak to you today about a great injustice that has long taken advantage of the humble, wise, and benevolent film producer. I am speaking of the studios and their shady accounting practices. I, for one, have produced dozens of pictures, and I've never seen my fair share of the profits. While the fat cats in those ivory palaces enrich themselves on my hard work and the hard work of others like me, we toil and toil. And I am here to tell you that their way of doing things is coming to an end.
Stansel had declared war. Even for Fox, this was the last straw.
Jack, it's Fox. I know I've been a bit of a pill when it comes to Stansel, but this new fairness business has gone too far.
Warner fielded calls from all over town that afternoon, all united in their contempt for Stansel's new initiative. Swift condemnations came out through the trades, with almost everyone in town promising this new age of transparency would pass. But Stansel wasn't intimidated. Stansel told the Trader Joe's Fearless Flyer, which was an entertainment rag at the time,
"Does the lion presiding over the African savannah worry itself with the yapping of hyenas? Does the moon concern himself with the chattering of space gremlins who live on his face? Of course not, and neither shall I give a second thought to these so-called moguls. I am Irving Stansel, the president of Hollywood, and no one can stop me."
For some reason, they printed his extensive laughter. The moguls met again, but this time Jack Warner was noticeably absent. Several ideas were discussed, including further embarrassment in the press, burning his house down, and sending in a honey trap. But they couldn't come to an agreement on any one plan. Until Jack Warner finally burst into the room.
Good Lord, Jack. You look like hell.
Jack was uncharacteristically frazzled. His suit looked dirty, and what hair he had left was a mess. Carl Lemley looked back on the incident in his book.
Jack's hands were covered in gray powder. There were rumors that he liked to strangle transients to blow off steam, so I suppose I just chalked it up to that.
Jack apologized for his tardiness, saying that a script meeting had run over time.
Where was this script meeting? At the bottom of a well?
The moguls laughed, but Warner sat stone-faced. The next morning, Irving Stansel didn't show up to his office. His secretary called around, but no one had seen him. And for 77 years, no one would. In April of 1997, workers were demolishing the building that once served as Irving Stansel's office. As one wall came down, they came across a startling discovery. Behind the wall was a mummified man, still wearing an impeccable suit. A grayed satin sash read, "The President of Hollywood." So what happened to Stansel? No definitive written proof from the era survives. Sure, there's plenty of speculation. All indications pointed to Warner, but others posited that it was Fox, furious that Irving hadn't turned out to be the man he thought. Yet others were convinced it was a scorned Theta Bera whose advances Stansel had rebuffed. It remains in the files of the LAPD as a cold case. In my research, however, I came across a clue. Mary Pickford said something very interesting during an interview in the 1970s. Take a listen.
In this business, careers as long as yours are unheard of. What was the secret for you?
Oh, well, of course Frances and Fred did it. She never forgave him for her molasses picture failing, and poor gullible Fred would do anything she told him to. The only way to get rid of a man like that is to ignore him, and they're much easier to ignore behind a foot of plaster.
Excuse me?
Oh, hello. I'm Mary Pickford, from the pictures. Pleasure.
Unremembered Hollywood was created, written, and produced by Charlie Fonville. Abby Larson was played by Annie Savage. That's me. Original music by Jonathan Dinerstein. With Hal Lublin as Irving Stansel and Announcer 1. Jeremy Carter as Jack Warner and policyholder number 2. Megan Gogarty as Frances Marion and Ethel Pomeroy. John Ennis as Carl Lemley and Leland Cornwall IV. Martin Olson as Douglas Fairbanks and Mortimer Effington III. Cara Louise as Mary Pickford. Christopher Gordon as Adolf Zukor. Judson Jones as Fred Thompson. Mike Rock as William Fox and policyholder 3. Justin Wright Neufeld as D.W. Griffith and policyholder 1. Fred Cross as announcer 2, interviewer, and New York Times reporter. And J.T. Arbogast as announcer 3. Join us next month for another unremembered tale from Hollywood's yesteryear. You can find more episodes and info on our website, unrememberedhollywood.com. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, if such things interest you, at unrememberedpod. If you like the show, why not leave a review on iTunes? Mary Pickford would. And in case you hadn't noticed, Unremembered Hollywood is a work of fiction. The names are the names of real people, but they never said these words in this order. Characters, dialogue, and actions were all completely made up. No one walled anyone up or bought any orphans, at least as it relates to this.